Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you. It's once again a pleasure to stand and speak to Bill 31, in this case to the reasoned amendment. And I want to focus my comments this evening specifically to the wording within the amendment. And I appreciate the member for Edmonton Southwest going after that specific area, but was certainly disappointed that two of the references he gave in his speech he could not substantiate upon questioning. And that concerns me, because if that sort of quotation is being made in the House, and if it's stated that the AAAHT, which is an organization that no longer exists, was consulted with, if it's stated that the Western College of Veterinary Medicine was consulted with, and yet we don't have dates, we don't have names, and we don't have any information, and I can assure the member for Edmonton Southwest, in fact I can assure all of the members on both sides of the House, that I have had more recent communication with the Western College of Veterinary Medicine than probably anybody else in the House has had, and yes, that includes you, Minister of Advanced Education. I've chatted with them since your meeting. And so, Mr. Speaker, what this amendment hinges upon really is the word consultation. And that is a word that, my goodness, gets tossed around here a lot. And the concern that I have is that it seems that the word means different things to different people. And so I went back to sort of the days when I was in high school debating, and in every high school debate, when you had a debate, you had a resolution, and the first thing you did, the first affirmative speaker had to define the terms. And so I said, that would be a good idea. Let's see if we can at least settle on what consultation means. So I did some checking in some different dictionaries, and there's a number of them, but there's not that much variation. Basically, consultation means, according to the Cambridge, for example, Dictionary of English, the act of exchanging information and opinions about something in order to reach a better understanding of it, to make a decision, or meeting for this purpose. I said, okay, that seems reasonable. And in fact, the example they used was, we hope to work in consultation with Congress on how the law should be interpreted. Sort of makes sense. The second definition, also from the Cambridge English Dictionary, the process of discussing something with someone in order to get their advice or opinion about it. And I said, well, that certainly makes sense. Consultation seeks opinion from the other person. And certainly consultation implies a two-way exchange of information. Somebody seeking information, somebody providing that information, and then going back and forth. I think it's fair to say that you cannot reasonably call something a consultation if there is only a one-way flow of information. A consultation involves an exchange. A consultation is two-way. And so, it's interesting that the example for the second definition I gave was this. The policy change was presented to us as a fait accompli, without consultation or discussion. Does that sound familiar? I think it does sound very familiar, because in fact, in talking to many stakeholder groups, and the veterinary profession is only the latest of those stakeholder groups, this government has fallen into a trap of dictation rather than consultation. And I've talked to many stakeholder groups where they say that representatives from the minister's office brought them into a room, sat them down, told them what was coming, turned on their heel, and left the room. There's no opportunity for questions. There's no opportunity for exchange, and that would happen once, usually shortly before the introduction of a bill. Not always, but I have heard that pattern of behavior time and time again from this government. Now that concerns me, and it should concern you folks, because that does not engender trust. That in fact endangers trust. That does not engender a good working relationship. And so when we specifically talk about Bill 31 and the consultation, during the course of debate on second reading on the motion for referral, there was an exchange between myself and the Minister for Service Alberta. The Minister for Service Alberta said the following, and this is in Hansard on page 2266, and I quote, "I just want to touch again on the veterinary piece of this legislation. We consulted. We had 2 in-person meetings with the association. We had an additional phone call with the association. I'm told that this is, in fact, more consultation than what was done when there was amalgamation of the technologists and the vets. You know, there was good and substantial consultation. Well, Mr. Speaker, there's a basic problem when you make a statement like that. Veterinarians keep very good records. It's part of what we do. We record stuff. And to give you an idea of the comparison of the consultation on Bill 13 and Bill 31 that we're discussing right now, there's the sum total of the documentation on the consultation on Bill 31. Most of this I've tabled already. Now I'll be tabling this. This is one copy of the consultation documentation on Bill 13. One copy. The consultation on Bill 13, in fact, extended back to when, even before this government took office. And I know that because when it was first considered to bring technologists into the veterinary profession, guess who was consulted by the then Minister of Justice, Training and Labor? Myself. I was consulted as to whether that would be a good idea. And I told the minister, yes, absolutely, it would be a good idea. The veterinary profession certainly supports it. Animal health technologists are trusted professionals that work shoulder to shoulder with us, and we would very much like to see them as equal partners within our association. So yes, there was consultation back then. And, you know, I will say, and I said this before, that the Honourable Minister of Labour, who became minister in January of 2016, 4 months later was able to pass Bill 13. And in that 4 months, she had 12 separate instances of communication with the Alberta Veterinary Medical Association. 12 separate instances of communication. Emails, phone calls, face-to-face meetings, and the exchange of no less than 4 draft copies of the proposed legislation. 4 were exchanged back and forth between the Alberta Veterinary Medical Association and the minister's staff. And that exchange and that work together engendered a sense of trust. And the Alberta Veterinary Medical Association trusted the Minister of Labour, and they understood the rationale behind what was going on with that legislation. And as a result, for those of you who recall, the debate on Bill 13 was rather uneventful. Pretty much everybody agreed on it because it was good legislation. It was legislation that had passed the test of consultation. A two-way discussion, a two-way dialogue that occurred. Now I'm sorry that the minister, it appears, has been given bad information. But when the minister is given information that says the consultation on Bill 13 was in fact more robust and more complete than the consultation on Bill 31, it simply isn't true. And you know, I find it interesting because the minister in her opening remarks on Tuesday afternoon said that there had been misinformation. And she said in her very first paragraph in Hansard, and this is on page 2265, and I quote, "There seems to be a lot of misinformation being communicated throughout this House as well as outside of this House. So I would like to take another opportunity, in addition to the comments I made upon introduction of second reading, to provide further clarification." Well, Mr. Speaker, I guess my question is where's the misinformation coming from? And who's disseminating it? You know, a number of my colleagues have now received the same form letter response from the minister with regards to this bill. And that form letter response has in and of itself within it 5 major inaccuracies. 5, and it's a short letter. And it's interesting because members of this legislature, private members and members of cabinet in the government caucus, have been using that exact same letter over their signature to reply to constituents. Form letter, and it's easily recognizable because the form letter contains the same 5 errors. Mr. Speaker, this has done nothing to improve the level of trust between the Alberta veterinary community, including veterinarians and registered veterinary technologists, and this government. And I'm also seeing that in the copies of letters I'm getting from many former supporters of this government, people who formerly voted for the NDP, people who had intended on voting for the NDP, but they won't be making that mistake again. Because, Mr. Speaker, this piece of legislation, in fact, is changing votes, at least in my profession. Now, this government may well have made a calculation that there's only 3,000 of them and we can afford to lose that many votes, and, that's all worthwhile. So we may well be the sacrificial lambs on their altar of what? What exactly are they trying to accomplish? Now, the member for Edmonton Southwest repeated once again the situation of the senior with regards to her dog. And, I certainly feel for her. Clearly it was a difficult situation that she was in. But I will also tell you that if somebody asked me to review a dentistry bill of $4,800, I would never offer a competing price quote without knowing exactly what was done on that animal and what was involved. And if those other price quotes were given without that information, well, then it's not, that's part of the problem. That's part of the issue with the whole situation of price transparency, which the government House Leader talked about. We're not talking about sacks of potatoes here, Minister. We're not talking about this is the same as this is the same as this. Every patient is unique. Every single one. And to post a singular price that is supposed to be a one-size-fits-all, medicine doesn't work that way. Medicine doesn't work that way. So, Mr. Speaker, this is the problem that we have with regards to consultation, and this government has completely broken the trust. They are acting with the input from whom? We were told from the input of the AAAHT. Well, that association doesn't exist anymore. Input from WCVM. Who did they talk to? And they said several veterinary clinics. I'd love to know who. I'd love to know who is in the veterinary community saying that they actually disagree with the ABVMA on this. And he gave two anecdotes regarding fees that seem to be unreasonable. Well, Mr. Speaker, I took statistics in university, and one thing I learned is the plural of anecdote is not data. So you collect together some scattered anecdotes and you figure that you've got a strong case. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Now, if there was an issue with that bill or any other bill, we have a very well-established disciplinary and ethics procedure within our profession, as do all other self-regulated professions. And I've talked in this House before how that works. But I've also talked that is not a very busy part of our association. But if this government feels that there is something rotten in the veterinary profession, and clearly they do, because otherwise they wouldn't be bringing this forward, if they think that there's something so flawed within our current self-regulatory body, then I encourage them to open a dialogue with the Veterinary Medical Association, and not what they're doing right now, and that is completely ignoring all requests for dialogue. The minister has never met once, the Minister of Service Alberta, has never met once with the association or with its president. The Minister of Labour, to whom we are actually responsible, came to the Alberta Veterinary Medical Association annual general meeting and spoke to that body. That's how you engender trust. You don't do it by doing this and undercutting a group of professionals that has self-governed successfully for over 111 years. I find it absolutely baffling that this government, under the guise of consumer protection, can reverse 111 years of successful self-governance and basically decide that they know better for the veterinary profession than the group of professionals that are actually involved in it. It is sad, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, again, I'm going back to a letter that we received from the Minister of Service Alberta on November the 3rd, in which she said that no legislative changes would be contemplated without consultation and engagement with the Veterinary Association. The next time we heard from the minister was the day before introduction of the legislation, at which time she was not willing to share, and it wasn't her, it was one of her staff.
Honourable member under 29-2A.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really appreciate the knowledge and the awareness of the actual facts of the reality that the member has been presenting. I'd love to hear him continue with what he was going to say, and I have one question for him. As a veterinarian, how does he feel being lumped in with unscrupulous ticket resale scammers, supposedly honest automobile crooks, and high-cost credit groups who are sharking from people? How does he feel as a veterinarian being lumped in with that group in one bill? Thank you.
Honourable member.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for the questions. I mean, what I can tell you is that what maybe doesn't matter so much is how I feel, because somehow my feelings don't matter according to the minister. It's bad to say anything negative about being grouped in, but I think what is important is how my colleagues feel. How the 3,200 plus members of the Alberta Veterinary Medical Association, how they feel about being placed in a bill that is specifically intended to deal with scammers. And that word scammers was used by the minister in her introductory remarks to this. And because this bill deals not with the fringes of veterinary medicine, you didn't decide to go after the people who practice veterinary medicine without a license. The unscrupulous people who provide what are veterinary services by definition but have never studied veterinary medicine are not licensed, and if something goes wrong, they have no recourse. The owner of the animal has no recourse to the Alberta Veterinary Medical Association. You didn't go after those folks. Those are the scammers. But no, instead, you decided to go after the core of our profession. The very core of the veterinary profession is the target that you have decided to take with this legislation. And I wonder who's next. Should the member for Edmonton Whitemud be concerned because the medical profession is next? Should the member for Bonnyville Cold Lake be concerned because the accountants are next in the crosshairs of this government? Mr. Speaker, I'd like to once again quote. This is the letter that our association president, this is quoting from the letter that our association president received on the 3rd of November, some 2.5 months after she asked the minister for clarification as to why this bill was coming forward. And I quote, "Based on the consultation results, should the government of Alberta determine this as an area of focus, further consultation and engagement with industry stakeholders would be necessary to develop the details of any potential legislative or regulatory amendments. As responsibility for the Veterinary Professions Act falls under the Ministry of Labour, I would refer to my colleague, the Honourable," and gives the minister's name, Minister of Labour, for her consideration. Mr. Speaker, none of that happened. None of that happened. In the space of time from November 3rd, when this letter was received, to December 4th, as I believe when the bill was introduced, or actually it was introduced before then, it was introduced on November the 29th, there was zero consultation with the Alberta Veterinary Medical Association. There were not 2 in-person meetings and 1 phone call. There was 1 in-person meeting and 2 phone calls, and I know that because that's what our medical records say. And I trust those medical records. And we've already shown that some of the information that's been given to the Minister for Service Alberta is incorrect. So it comes down to who I and who my colleagues trust as far as providing accurate information. And so this motion, this reasoned motion, Mr. Speaker, provides and states that this bill should not be read for a second time because veterinarians across our province haven't been consulted. I think that is pretty clear that that hasn't happened, because you've all been receiving letters from my colleagues right across this province, from one end to the other. The second reason is because the Alberta Veterinary Medical Association was not adequately consulted, and I can tell you it was not. And it was a massive departure from our experience with Bill 13, and that's why it is so disappointing. So, Mr. Speaker, I am in favor of this reasoned amendment. I know the word consultation gets tossed around here a lot, but I can tell you the consultation is a two-way dialogue in which Both parties feel they were equal participants. And in this case, that test has failed. This was not a consultation, and this amendment, Mr. Speaker, should pass accordingly. Thank you.